You've already worked with HTML controls and briefly viewed ASP.NET's code behind files. In this lesson, you'll use some very basic C# code to change the properties of controls on a web page. To begin, open the C# test sample file from your sample files folder. And open default.aspx in Design View. Now add a label control from the Standard category of the toolbox and set its ID property to label output. Now open the code behind file of default.aspx. You learned how to do this in lesson 1.7. You've probably noticed that when you expand an ASPX file, there's a designer.cs file as well as the code behind file. This file is used by the design view of the Visual Studio interface. All of the code inside it is automatically generated, and you will never have to edit it manually. Next, you're going to add some C# code to set the text property of your new label. You can see default.aspx's C# code on this page. At the moment, the important code is protected void page load. This is a method. Methods are the way that C# code is organized into pieces that can be run individually. The page load method is an event handler. An event handler is a special type of method that runs in response to something happening. In this case, the event that triggers the event handler is the page loading. You'll learn more about event handlers in lesson 3.2. The curly bracket symbols show where the method begins and ends. Everything between the curly brackets is part of the method. As you can see, at the moment, the method is empty. Click in the space between the curly brackets now and add the following code. Label output.text equals begin quotes hello world end quotes semicolon. This line of code ends with a semicolon. Semicolons are required by C# to indicate the end of a line of code. You might have noticed in lesson 2.11 that JavaScript uses the same convention. You'll notice, however, that the code that defines the method doesn't have a semicolon at the end of it. Lines that contain other code using curly brackets don't need semicolons, because the curly brackets define the area that they affect. Because C# doesn't consider a line of code to be finished until it sees a semicolon, you can split a long line of code onto multiple lines without causing any problems. Now view the page in your web browser. The text property of your label control is changed by your C# code when the page loads, and Hello World is displayed. Let's take a closer look at what ASP.NET has done by viewing the source of this page. To do this in Internet Explorer, right-click on the page and click View Source from the shortcut menu. You should see a line of code that says span ID equals label output hello world. Now close your browser and return to default.aspx in Source View. Compare the label code here. It should say ASP:label ID equals label output. When a user requests your page, the web server converts the ASP controls into HTML code that the user's web browser can understand. In this case, the ASP label control is converted into a set of HTML span tags. The real power of ASP.NET is in the use of event handlers and C# code to change the properties of elements on the page in response to user interaction, making pages interactive. Next, we're going to add some more C# code to make the label controls text bold. Switch back to default.aspx.cs, that's the code behind file of default.aspx. Add a new line after hello world, and add the following code. Label output dot font dot bold equals true, semicolon. This line of code is a little different to the previous one. The first property that you set in this lesson is text, which is a string. A string is literally a piece of text. When you set the property in C#, you put the value in quote marks. C# automatically assumes that anything between quote marks is a string. If you'd left out the quote marks, the project would have failed to build and displayed an error. The second property, however, is a Boolean. A Boolean value can only be either true or false. You'll learn more about the different types of value supported by C# in Session 5. Now view the page in your browser once more, and you can see that your C# code has made the text bold. Close your web browser now, and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 3.1. Change properties with C#.